Which name should you use for your domain? This is an important question to ask. Well, choosing your domain name is an important step when building your Active Directory domain. A lot of system administrators neglect this important step, and neglecting this step can cause you problems. Maybe not in the short term, but at some point of the evolution of your infrastructure, of your company, of the IT standards, chances are you will face some problems. Let me explain all of this. Lots of system administrators, when they are asked to create an Active Directory domain, the name they choose for that domain is usually companyname.local. And when you ask them why they choose this name, the answer is usually for security reasons. By choosing the .local top-level domain instead of the .com, their domain will not be accessible from the internet, and hence risks of external threats decreases. But choosing the .local extension for your domain name is not a good idea, and this is why. Imagine if your company planned to publish something on the internet, a website or an e-commerce platform or something like that. You can't register any URL that ends with the .local for public access. And what if the .local domain became available on the internet and someone buys it before you did? If your users want to access the www.companyname.local website to see what kind of services that company sold, your local DNS, the domain name server, will try to redirect them to the local server, and they will not be able to access this company website. Another reason not to choose the .local domain is related to certificates. Certificates guarantee a secure data exchange between the client and the server by encrypting data. These certificates are issued by specialized companies called certificate authorities. But since 2015, the Certificate Authorities Forum decided to not more issue certificates for not public domains. As a consequence, your servers are seen as not trusted servers by users who want to connect to them. At this point, you may think, okay, I got it. I will not use the .local extension for my domain. I will use the .com instead. My company has a registered public domain name with the .com extension, so why not use it for our Windows domain as well? While it's possible to use a .com domain name for your Active Directory, you have to consider some points. First, you need to have two sets of DNS servers, an internal DNS server that contains records for the internal servers mapped to internal IP addresses, and an external DNS server mapped to public addresses. Let me explain that. You have a public web server on the internet, www.companyname.com. When an internal user types this URL, your internal DNS sees that the URL contains the domain company.com. He will say, okay, this is the internal domain, so I can map this URL to the local server IP address. And of course, the user will not be able to open the web page because the DNS server wasn't able to connect him to the right server. This can be addressed, but need implementing a complicated configuration of your DNS servers. Another point to consider is security issues. As you are using the same name for your internal and external domain, you don't want anyone from the internet accessing your internal network. You may face some security issues. So now I guess you are confused. I told you it's not a good idea to use the .local domain, neither the .com. So what domain name should you use? The best practices recommended by Microsoft is to name your internal domain as a subdomain of your external domain. For example, I own the domain zintech.com. So my internal domain will be something like corp.zintech.com or ad.zintech.com. This will ensure that all the queries on my internal resources are handled by the internal DNS server, and any request on the external resources, for example, my website, www.zintech.com, are forwarded to the external DNS server. Also, the security is improved, as the external DNS server doesn't have any record of the internal network, as they are stored in the internal DNS server. In conclusion, even if you are setting up a domain for a small business, always follow the best practices. Take into consideration the future needs and evolutions. Another best practice to consider is to always register the public domain name for your company, even if your company is not planning to publish a website or any other external service that need a public domain. If you don't do it, someone else can register that domain before you, and hence he will own it.